Hello and welcome back to Saturday Night Later. I'm your host, Marina Templesman, the writer of the upcoming book, Unusual Things, a guide to sketch comedy for writers, fans, and everyone else. So usually my co-host Madeline Baldanzi and I bring on guests to break down SNL sketches and talk about the structure of sketch comedy. But while SNL is on hiatus, I'm having conversations with sketch writers and teachers about specific craft questions. And I am so thrilled to introduce our first guest for one of these conversations. You've seen his work at the UCB, at Just for Laughs, on Dropout, on CBS, on Comedy Central, with Broadway Video, and many more places. Welcome to the incredibly talented Frank Garcia-Hejl. Frank, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so pumped that you're here. You're a return guest. You're our first return guest, actually, to the podcast. You were here talking about the Josh O'Connor SNL episode. And here you are to talk with us about characters, impressions, and also all things sketch. When I put out a notification that, I was going to be speaking with you, a lot of people had questions about sketch in general, but specifically about characters, impressions, because you are such an incredibly talented character writer, performer, impressionist, all of these things.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh man, I'm so pumped to be doing this. This is great. So before we go too much further, it's going to be a real range of people who are listening. So there's a combination of people who send in questions, include people who have never written sketch before, also includes people who are UCB teachers. So everybody wants to know Frank's wisdom. So first, before we go too far, why don't you go ahead and define for us what is a character sketch, and how do you think of character sketches and impressions in general?
Yeah, so the difference is when we're dealing with character sketch, it's built around a character. There is a person or people, I guess. If it's a peas in a pod, they're going to be two characters, and it's centered around their unique point of view and behavior. So typically you'll get a sketch that's usually premise based, where it's okay, we're at a first date at a restaurant and our waiter seems kind of weird, and we find out it's a vampire restaurant, right? And then we see what's true about that restaurant if it's a vampire restaurant. So we use our base reality of a regular restaurant, but what would that look like if vampires ran it, right? But for a character, it really is, we have the same setup of the who, what, where, but the character is a unique and unusual thing. It's what we call at UCB game, right? Their point of view and behavior is the game. We know how traditionally we would react in a certain situation, where it'd be at Disneyland or wherever, right? I'm using Disney World or Disneyland as an example because of Debbie Downer.
Yeah.
People usually know when you talk about characters and you say Debbie Downer, people immediately know what that character is and what her character game is. And it's putting her at Disney World puts her in the happiest place on earth, and she's the most miserable person. So then she can react to the things around her. So basically what we're doing is you take a unique character with a point of view and behavior, and you can pluck them up and put them in any situation or any scenario. And you're going to see the truth of how that character reacts and relates and lives within that environment.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think that there's it's so interesting because I remember sometimes when students are first learning, it's they try very hard to create a really sharp distinction, like a premise sketch versus a character sketch. And that vampire waiter one that you mentioned is actually a great example, where it's yes, in the vampire restaurant, the waiter is a character, but not everything and all of the beats are generated by that vampire waiter, right? Versus a sketch that's I don't know, what would be, I'm trying to think about what the character forward version of that idea would be.
I mean, even with characters take Matt Foley, the motivational speaker, the classic Chris Farley character.
That's the van down by the river.
Van down by the river. Yeah, that's the catchphrase of you're going to be living in van down by the river. And with that character, we take the traditional, it's supposed to be a motivational speaker. And what do we know about motivational speakers is they usually have success. They usually have something that they can speak to be I had this success. I'm going to motivate you to have the same success. But what's unique about Matt Foley is that he really doesn't have any success. He's failed, he's living in a van down by the river because of the mistakes that he made. And he's using that in order to inspire the kids that he's going to talk to. Right. So it's that character is built. Even there, we have a profession that traditionally should be this, and we have a character that's in that position that shouldn't be. So we
Yeah.
already have something that's fun there.
Something fun and unusual, which is the
Yeah,
game, right? Yeah. So there we
yeah,
go.
exactly.
So what
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think,
that's something that I think even on Threads recently, because there was this video about a guy saying like why he thinks like why people think SNL sucked now, which is a thing that's been said since the beginning of SNL.
yeah.
Um, but he pointed to like being that it's more game focused
Mm,
and instead of character focus, and I argued saying like, well, character is game, right? You know,
yeah.
if you have that unusual behavior, and they've always had that, because the broad definition of game that we teach it at UCB is, you know, what is funny or unusual about your scene, and we present that, and then explore if this is true, what else is true.
Right. Yeah. There's a really funny James Downey line, and I'm kind of paraphrasing that like writers like to write sketches that have ordinary people in weird situations, and actors like to have weird people in ordinary situations.
Yeah,
And so I think that sometimes, and I think that's an interesting thing. I think also to clock when you go see live sketch shows anywhere, right? Not just SNL, like the things that the actors are more excited about versus the thing that the writers might be more excited about. Like,
yeah.
are those the big performances? Is it something that's a little more like heady and more like how where do the laughs come from? And is it generated by the character or generated by sort of like the characters taking in something unusual in their environment?
And sometimes it can overlap. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say it's more of a premise sketch, but like recently the on SNL, the Beavis and Butthead, you know, in the audience sketch.
Wait, I'm totally
Do you
drawing a
remember
blank on
that
this
one?
one.
I
I
can't
will.
remember. Oh, it was Ryan Gosling. Yeah, it was that episode where it was like an interview, and then in the background, you can see in the audience there were two guys that it was, I think it was him and Mikey Day, maybe, that were like Beavis and Butthead,
It's so funny. I have like no
basically. It was
recollection
like
of
looking
this sketch.
exactly
I
like
watched
Beavis.
every sketch this season for sure.
You forgot it already. Yeah,
That
you
one
wiped it from
totally
your memory.
exited my head.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh
sometimes there
man.
can be a little bit of overlap. I mean, because those are very unique characters, but it's mostly premise because it's like, oh, what if two people in the background of this
Yeah.
important interview look like Beavis and Butthead, and then they have the
I
same
like that.
personality as it too. Yeah.
That's really fun. I like that. I'll have to go check that one out again. That's the perk of forgetting a sketch is you can be like, I'm gonna go be surprised by it all over again.
Yeah.
Great. So Frank, how you are so good at this type of sketch and also at impressions too, which we'll circle back to more
Mhm.
later. How do you well actually first quickly let's talk about impressions. Like how
Yeah.
do you think of impressions within the context of character sketches? Like is that sort of its own unique beast? Is it just like a specific subset of a character sketch? How do you think about those?
I think people have different approaches to impressions because some people they just it's enough to sound like the person and then just kind of saying whatever.
Mhm.
My approach and a lot of people that I know that do impressions, they try to find the hook.
Yeah.
Basically like the character game of the impression that they're doing so they can find something that they can like latch onto. I think Dana Carvey was kind of like one of those guys of like finding that like pure characteristic that people recognize.
Mm.
Because like even his impressions, they're good, but like they're not like really precise in a
Mhm.
sense. But he's found that character game of the impression. So even if it's not like exactly sounding like the person, he's found that quality that people are like, right, yeah, they do that.
Mhm.
And so like for me, when I'm coaching it or I'm it's been a long I gotta be honest, like it's been a long time since I've tackled impressions. One, it's hard to find, you know, new people to do, especially as
Mhm.
I get older too. And
Mhm.
like, you know, it's a different ball game for me now. But like I still try to say when people do impressions, like, well, first, what's the angle?
Right. Yeah.
Like, what is it about them that you find funny? And what is it that you want to portray in your impression? Because it's enough to like some for some people, it's enough to sound like them, and that's great. And there are ways that you could work on that. We could talk about
Mhm.
that later too.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But for me, I find that you get more mileage out of finding the character game of the celebrity
Yeah.
or that
Yeah.
unique end that keeps it because you know is like if you have the point of view and the behavior and those both have to exist in my opinion for character both have to exist and we have a Venn diagram of like behavior can be stronger than point of view, but point of view, sometimes can be stronger than behavior, but they both have to exist,
Yeah, and let's
you
actually
know?
unpack that a little bit more because that kind of Venn diagram thing is an interesting way of thinking about characters. So basically, sometimes we talk about characters as kind of being made up of a few different pieces, right? There's like their
Yeah.
behavior, which is like what they're actually doing, their point of view, which is like how they look at the world or look at the specific unusual thing that they're doing or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's their characteristics, right? Which is like, what do they look like? What are they doing?
Yeah.
Do they have a silly hat on their head or something like that?
Right. Yeah.
Like whatever that is, right? And I
Yeah.
think that often when people are starting out with sketches, they're like, make it all unusual. Like this is crazy hat man who thinks he's a duck and
Yeah.
uh like quacks at kids or something like that. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think
Sorry,
the
go ahead.
question of how you sort of decide what is your character, what's interesting. And I think that what you're getting at with like the hook, like what's interesting about a bit for an impression is true, but also for a character, right? Like what's the
Yeah.
interesting part about it?
Yeah, it can't be too broad too, because like being bad at something isn't enough. And like a lot of people will write character stuff about being like, the bad doctor, and it's just that they're bad at their job. And that's why I think one of the I don't know if we still show it in character class or even during character week for sketch classes, but there's a Kids in the Hall sketch that's called Bad Doctor,
Hmm. Hmm.
and in that sketch you have it literally starts with him saying like, I'm a bad doctor. And like he's got blood all over him and everything, and it just it's starts a little broad, but then as it goes on, you find out that he got to that position because of his charm. And then now he just makes referrals and stuff. So he basically, he was helped along the way, and nobody holds him accountable, and he's still being able to be successful in that because, he gets away with it, right? So
Right.
that's the specificity that we found that gives us the engine or the gas to elaborate on the character.
Yes.
Because also if it's just behavior, it runs thin, the audience gets ahead of it, and you could really like just fall flat.
Yeah.
But if you know what their point of view is, then you have what your character we have what we call our character lens.
Mhm.
So then now you view the world, everything, anything and everything through this character lens. And if you know the point of view, even if you don't state it outright, some characters you have to be clear about what their point of view is in the sketch.
Mhm.
Other characters it's already implied, um, and you don't have to define it as much. But I think it has to exist. You at least need to know, like, what is their point of view about the world, and how does it apply to this situation, and what's the fun you get out of putting them in this situation too? Because sometimes I would write a character just being like, this is what I find is the funny point of view and behavior, and now I'm going to try to find the playground that
Mhm.
best suits
Mhm.
this. We do this in improv when you go to second beats in a herald format where you're playing a character game in the first beat, and you're doing something called a time dash in the second beats where you're trying to find another time and place for this character to play, and you're just trying to find like, what's the most fun I can put this character. And I describe it as in like recurring sketches like on SNL or Key and Peele or anything like that,
Mhm.
because the character is so clear that you want to see them in other situations, and that's why
Yeah.
you have recurring sketches, because
Yeah.
it's very clear what's fun about that character.
Yeah. I think that's great, and I think that thinking about it in terms of playground is, I think, a really great way to a great framework for thinking about
Yeah,
that.
because I
Yeah.
have students that write really great characters, but they put them in a situation where it might limit the character or
Yeah.
doesn't feel like there's much for them to really sink their teeth into. So, like, you really do have to find the fun scenario
Yeah, this is so
for that
interesting.
character.
I feel like there's a thing that always used to come up in classes where people would write a sketch that was set at a yoga class. And I feel like there's
Yeah,
something specifically about yoga classes that are
yeah.
really, really, really hard.
Especially in LA, there's a lot of, like, yoga teachers, characters that come out.
Sure, right? But
Yeah.
it's like there's something because it's so funny because there's so many sketches that are set in different classrooms that work
Mhm.
great. But I think with yoga class in particular, that's like something that's like an extra hard nut to crack in terms of like actually getting to have your characters play because at a certain point it's like the rhythm of it is slow, so it's hard to like supply more beats. And then there's a real
Mhm.
like, why wouldn't you just get up and leave? It's hard to find variety, I guess, from within the context of the class.
Also, because it's a teaching scenario.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
especially if your main character is the yoga teacher, then you're stuck kind of teaching. Great, granted, you have the base reality, and you always use the base reality to move it forward. So then that way we can
Yeah.
explore more. But like you end up with a teaching scene, and it's not as fun as opposed to one of my favorite character sketches of all time is Bill Hader's puppet class,
Yeah, that's a
one
great one.
where he's a dishonorably discharged vet who's in this puppet class, and uh, Seth MacFarlane's character, I almost said Todd McFarlane, the creator of Spawn, Seth MacFarlane character who's leading the class, right? And that having him lead the class gives it more of the engine to move the scene forward. So
Yeah.
then that way, Bill Hader's character can react to it based off of his point of view and behavior. So then
Yes.
that way, even where like his teacher character is like, you know what, let's try another voice.
Yeah.
And
It's
when they like, he tries to get the character away from doing what he's doing. But even by doing that, we also another thing to say is, I'm sorry if I go off on tangents
No,
here,
this is
but
great. I love this. This
the
is
other
great.
thing too is like your characters, I always say this to my students for your voice of reason and your unusual character, they can be elastic.
Yeah.
They never change. They never have a hard change where it's like, okay, you know what, you're right. I was wrong, about
Yeah.
this thing, because then you have to reset the scene, right? But if you have this moment where Seth MacFarlane's character that's leading the class says, let's try a different voice. He's trying to get the character to change. And then Bill Hader's character actually acquiesces and does it. And then he follows up being like, oh, this character is fun. Tell me more about it. And he goes right back into that vet character.
I love that way of framing it, like thinking about them as elastic, because I think
Yeah.
that a problem that a lot of, especially new writers run into, but all writers, honestly, is like sometimes just you kind of wind up where it feels like you're trying to bang two action figures against each other, sort of with
Yeah.
your voice of reason and your unusual character, versus like finding more organic ways of like how do we continue to cultivate the scene so that more surprising game moves can come out. And I think that thinking about it in terms of elasticity, like what does it look like to try to accommodate or to try to move around or try to do this? And then that sort of, I think that that visual of elasticity is a great way of thinking about how you have your character sort of do something new and different and interesting while still being true to to what their unusual thing is.
Absolutely. And also you have to keep in mind, like, what's the relationship? Relationship is important, right?
Yeah.
We do this in our character classes and in even in my acting for sketch class, where I try to remind people that what is the relationship between the characters? Because the way that we interact with a stranger is different than we interact with a close friend, a close family member, an enemy, any of that stuff. So we you have to think about like, how do we deal with strangers?
Right.
Typically we try to avoid conflict.
Hmm.
So even then there's a little bit of leeway of letting the craziness happen because we don't want conflict.
Yes.
But we eventually get to the breaking point where there is conflict, right? And I
Yeah.
think the hardest part of writing character sketch is writing for the voice of reason, because people feel like it's still a problem I come up against it, where it's like, it feels like the voice of reason character is just saying, I don't like that. I don't like
Yeah.
that. Stop doing it. Stop doing it. But that's where base reality and the situation helps us move it forward,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Because even if it's a transaction scene, you still have to make a sale.
Right.
You
Yeah, I
still
love
have,
that.
like, what are they there to buy too? Like, even that of like, you have to use your base reality and own experience in those situations to be like, what's next? What other
Right.
things can happen within the situation, the environment, the people within it, to move it forward, so it's just not like, "Hey, stop doing that. Hey, stop doing that," and you're just talking about it and
Yeah.
having that conflict. You need the base reality to move it forward, so it gives us something new to react to.
And I think that's where that puppet sketch that you referenced is such a great example of just like, what does it look like to be like, hey, you know what? Let's try this other thing over there. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think that sometimes like, sorry, did you say blah blah? Or like, in this restaurant, we don't really let patrons blah 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 blah.
exactly.
Whatever it is. Like, what is the non-confrontational version? The counterpoint to that, I think, which can also be interesting, is sometimes when people forget to actually engage the voice of reason
Oh,
character,
yeah.
right, and use that. And I think that a thing that I like to tell my students too is, thinking about how a little goes a really long way with a voice of reason character. Like when you imagine if you're at brunch with a friend and they're being quiet and like giving like one word answers to you and it feels kind of tense.
Hmm.
um Everything changes once you say, hey, is everything okay, right? Like
Yeah.
everything immediately changes. You've totally, just by labeling that there's something off and that you know it, the dynamic is totally thrown off. Something totally new has to happen because you've
Yeah.
named it. So I think there's something really interesting about finding that sweet spot when you have an unusual character of like, how does the voice of reason kind of elicit more from them without basically being like I'm going to go away now.
You're serving the scene because you have to, what you just talked about is framing, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we tell our improv students too, of being like, you are noticing unusual behavior. Don't let it go.
Yeah.
Even if it's broad to begin with, of saying like, you seem sad.
Right. Hmm.
Just labeling that, your scene partner's then going to go like, right, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I am acting sad and here's why.
Yeah.
And then we start to get to define what's that why, where we start to get to the character game. But in sketch, you can lay that out easily of just being like framing the unusual thing,
Yeah.
where we
Hmm.
have our voice of reason basically speaking to what is fun or unusual.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because
then
that
from there,
clarity is so
yeah,
important.
exactly. We need that clarity. And that's, I think, important going back to sketch again, whiplash here. I'm gonna keep kind of
Oh,
going
no, I love it.
all
This
over
is
the place.
this is fantastic. I think this is great.
But like I think that for sketch and character or any comedy, I think so, even when you get into like the weird stuff, even with clowning or with stuff that breaks structure that's unusual and absurd, there is context.
Hmm.
We need to know the context of what is happening, even if it's just the tone context,
Hmm.
right? Context is everything because an audience needs to follow along, or at least you need to bring them into your world so they can settle in and get comfortable finding the focal point of where they're supposed to be paying attention.
Right.
I think that's one of the reasons why at UCB we say try to get to the game by the first page or page and a half, because if you take too long, or even when you watch SNL, they're setting up the premise and you're starting to clock immediately. Where's the funny? What's going to be the
Yeah.
funny thing? Where's the joke going to drop? And you start making assumptions. And if you don't deliver on their assumptions of that the audience is making, they're going to be a little disappointed when it's not exactly what you thought it was.
You're looking for clues all the time as you're starting. It's like there's always the fun feeling of like tension at the beginning of a sketch. The audience is like, where will this go? Right?
Yeah.
They want to figure it out.
They wanna
This
be able to sit back and relax and enjoy it, but they need the context of, like, what's happening here so they can just be like, "Oh, now you thrill me. You show me
Yeah.
what's
Hmm.
fun about it. You introduced it. Now I want to be satisfied with this thing you presented to me."
Totally. Well, I love that. So let's turn now to talk about a little bit about character sketches,
Mhm,
specifically about. So I want to talk to you about character sketches and how you come up with them and how
mhm.
they work for you. And there's a particular character sketch of yours that I'd love to sort of use as the jumping off point anytime you want to get into a specific, which is the Cubby Bangs character.
Yes,
So such a fantastic character, so much
thank you.
fun. So I would love to hear like you can speak broadly to this, but also if you want to speak specifically to the Cubby Bangs character, so that we have a concrete example. Like, how do you come up with a character sketch? What's your process for building out a character sketch and like finding that character's behavior, viewpoint, all of that stuff?
So, I mean, I'm always making mental notes of, like, people. I don't know, I like people watching, I was
Hmm.
kind of a quiet, uh kid, not quite kid, but like, in school and stuff, because I'm always in my head thinking, and I love watching people and seeing, especially there's for some I grew up in Texas, so you're around a lot of like machismo, a lot of like this very put on masculine. I don't know, like it's a lot of that when in the center of it, there's insecurity.
Right.
They're making up for something.
Hmm.
So then it's like, what is that? What is that bravado? Where does it come from? And what is it masking? So, like, some of my characters did come from that, of being exposed to that,
Right.
or even just like dealing with things that I know that I have, like, that kind of a not I don't hate about myself, but I'm annoyed that I do,
Mm.
and then blow it out.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
a good example of I don't have one off the top of my head. Oh, actually, yeah, no, I don't. Not off the top of
You're
my
like,
head
"That's
for
a
me.
secret I'm not gonna share with
But
anyone."
I was thinking about a student because I have a better example where a student of mine was talking about the fact that she hated that she would text somebody, and if they don't text back right away, she thinks the worst. She
Right.
spirals. So then she wrote a character around that where we're just amping it up.
Yeah.
Just like
Right.
taking that one thing and just like dialing it up. And it's something that you know about yourself, and you're like, yeah, I do this thing, and it's so stupid. And it's not something that you hate about yourself, but it's just a quirk that you notice, and you're just
Yes.
dialing it up. And
Yeah.
then otherwise, it's just kind of like funny. Sometimes it could just start from something physical,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it does change your brain chemistry when you're doing physicality and characters. We in class talk about like the main focal points when you're doing physicality and characters is the head, the chest, the hips, and the feet.
Mhm.
And we have you walk around the room, and then we're like, all right, lead with your head or your face.
Mhm.
And you do that, and we're like, what kind of personality does this remind you of?
Mm.
And people have different answers for that, and that's exactly what the exercise is. And then they go to chest and they go to hips, and like it changes their physicality, and it starts to remind them of personalities.
Yeah.
And as they're doing this walk, we ask them questions about like what do they like, what do they don't like, like what are their hobbies, if they had a captive audience, what would they want that audience to know? And
Mm.
they start to kind of form just based off of the behavior because you already are in a different mindset than your own point of view or your own physicality, and it starts to build out from there.
This is so cool because I love what you're describing is such a classic example of like a theater exercise. And I
It is.
love that because I think part of what's so interesting to me about sketch comedy and why part of what one of the many reasons I love it and I'm writing a book about it is because I think it's such an interesting type a medium that pulls in some people who kind of come at it in more of a performance angle, right? And there's the
Mhm.
theater of it, and there are some people who are just like the kind of heady writing kind of mathy or not
Yeah.
even mathy, but just like to kind of think through the ideas. And I
Mhm.
love that. I think
Think I'm losing you, Marina. Uh, sorry, in the
uh-oh.
chat, is it me freezing or is it you? Sorry.
I think it's me.
There's the New York storm happening?
Oh dear.
I can see and hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just texting you being like, my internet.
Yeah, this is a character. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
You were
Perfect.
doing your character, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That was my bit. Exactly. So yeah, so basically, like I think there's something very interesting about this intersection of,
Yeah.
of theater and writing that kind of all comes to a head with character sketches. So I love this exercise that you're describing. So how did your Cubby Banks character come about? Was that like a physicality first, an observation first?
It was started from, I grew up with classic rock,
Mhm.
and I was a big fan of, like, Wolfman Jack and, like, these, like, DJ characters, like, these rock and roll DJ characters, these personalities. When I was in Texas, there was a DJ called Redbeard, like, they would just have these, like, very distinct personalities, and the for me, Wolfman Jack, that's where the name Cubby Bangs came from, is a little bit like a cub, a wolf cub, and then like Bangs after Lester Bangs.
Mhm.
So like it's just a combination of that. And it all started by doing like a Wolfman Jack type of voice, just pretending to be a DJ and just kind of made me laugh. And then
Can you give us a little taste of that voice?
yeah, just like, hey there, kits and cats, I'm Cubby Bangs, just like a big, boisterous, rock and roll, ha ha. That
Mhm.
was like the whole like Wolfman Jack, oh baby, you know, he's like very loud and very in your face. And there was I was thinking about like the short attention spans that we have now, about like even me sometimes where a new album would come out or something and I'm kind of like searching through. I wouldn't even like really listen to a song. I just kind of be
Mm.
like skipping through it and stuff. And then it made me kind of laugh about a DJ who only played the parts of the songs that he liked, you know?
I I really love in that sketch. It's so delightful, and I love the just the point where he just says songs are too long. It's just such a great example of like concretely just like expressing what the character's point of view is, and just
Yeah.
then we get to have all the fun in the world
I
with
think I
that.
over in the sketch version of it, I think I've adjusted it since then. I think the one that's online now, that on the character's welcome page, is the rewritten version that I did when they came to LA and they
Mm.
asked me to do the character again. And the original one that I had in my show, I had a one-man show called Oh No, and it was like the last character I had in the show. And originally it was that he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you know, and then now that he's like legendary, he can kind of do whatever he wants.
Mhm.
And then in addition to that, just being like, well, songs are too long, so I'm only going to play the parts. But also, what I thought was fun about it is picking parts of the song that are basically the build up to like the payoff, whether it's like Slow Ride by Foghat, where it's that iconic intro with the drums and the build up before it goes into like Slow Ride. It like something made me laugh of like stopping it right before that.
Yeah.
Or even with like Panama by Van Halen, of only taking snippets of the song and mashing
Yes.
it together in a Frankenstein type of way, just because I like these particular moments of the song.
I well, a few things. First of all, I really liked that what you described was you kind of described both the justification for the behavior, right? He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so he can get away with it, and the point of view, which is that short kind of attention span for where he likes the parts of the songs that he likes.
Yeah, just
Um,
want to play those.
it must have been was that just like such a nightmare for the tech person though? I feel like there's like 600 cues. How did
Oh yeah,
that
there is. Yeah, I mean, I will say, I mean, like, I mean, huge credit, you know, to the tech people at UCB who are
Yeah,
always on top of
they're
it and like just
incredible.
absolutely. You find out really quickly, because especially if you do festivals and you tour with any sketch, you find that like UCB in particular has a very good set of tech people that know what they're doing, and it can be a nightmare. No matter how good a tech is, it's always a nightmare to have a million cues in
Yeah.
a sketch. But I also know audio editing, so
Mhm.
I created the cues so that way it would only be like you push a button and this at this point.
Mhm, mhm.
And so like I'm very aware of, because I also was the head tech at UCB for, I want to say 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
before I got on like a house team or anything like that. So like I knew the frustrations
Yeah.
of when people just show up and I'm like, well, where's this cue? They're like, I thought you could find it. And I'm
Right,
like,
because even when you're doing a character, like, even if it's a solo character, you are still involving somebody else in the process. I right,
people don't think about that process of being like,
yeah,
there's that end part where it's like the producing side of it that you have to
yeah,
think of as well. And also to make it easier, because you do not want an angry tech person.
no.
They will
I
mess it up and not give a shit because you gave them the impossible.
Yeah. I really like so the Cubby Banks character, it sounds like it really started kind of there are 2 things that kind of got pulled together. It started with the voice, right? Like,
Mhm.
this voice that you had in your head, and then also this kind of, whimsical thought about, like, the idea of, like, stopping the songs,
Yeah,
early on based on your own experience. And I think that that's an interesting thing to kind of signpost for people that, like, often characters kind of they come together when with 2 separate pieces, right? There's like a little bit of this
yeah.
and a little bit of that, and there's like a good match of those 2 things. Do you happen to remember for that idea, like, did one piece come I mean, it sounds like the piece of the DJs came up earlier because you grew up listening to that.
Yeah.
But like, how did those kind of pieces connect? Like, was that something where you were sitting and like trying to churn out ideas? Did it kind of drift across your mind one day in the car? Like, how does those connections
I
happen?
don't, it's kinda hard to talk about this a little bit because some of it is a little magic, right?
Yeah.
Where it kinda just finds itself. sometimes I have to really work on a character, just being like, I don't know, it makes me laugh that this character I had a character that was all physical, that was a guy in a boardroom giving a presentation, and then he starts to, like, fall, like, he's going back and forth, and he's like it's very physical bit, which I cannot do anymore, and it's ruined my body for the rest of my life, but, uh, it's yeah, a guy who can't fall, and he's like, "Did anybody feel that?" And it's like, "No?" And, like, there's no real point of view to it, really. But what made me laugh is just, like, him trying to keep it together and then, like, having this moment, and I think the way that I framed it was just that nobody else there that he's giving the presentation to is experiencing this.
Right, and that's a very relatable thing, that feeling of like, "No, nobody else? Okay, never mind." Yeah, right, and that's
Yeah.
a fun so it's pairing a fun physical idea with something that's also kind of, like,
Yeah, and if I
relatable.
really wanted to develop it longer, then I'd have to give it more of a trigger to be like, "Oh, is it that every time he gets nervous, he has this happen to him?" I don't know. But
Right.
for that one, and I think that's the thing about characters is like I said earlier, like, it should be point of view and behavior, but sometimes a character can just there are always exceptions to the rules.
Yeah, like, everyone wants to know, like, why Debbie Downer is so sad, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's not the
Eh
point.
yeah, and even, like, we use the example of Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer where the behavior is more prominent than the point of view because through the behavior, we find, like, what the joke is.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
Like, we know what like, he doesn't flat out say, like, "Well, I'm a caveman using my even though I've acclimated to the current times, I'm gonna use the fact that I'm a caveman in order to win this case."
Right, right.
To sway the jury to be like, "I'm a simple caveman. Your world frightens and confuses me, but I know that when my client deserves this money," and it's like, the fun of it is seeing him do that back and forth, even though he's very well spoken and he's got all this, and he talk about driving in his BMW, where it's clear enough.
Right, right.
And there's always exceptions to it. And I've found that like even with teaching it or coaching it, some characters can just be that like raw
Yeah.
thing that you can't really put your finger on because an audience can follow along and laugh.
Yeah. And that is sort of like what the measurement has to be, right? Like, just can it be is it fun with this amount of information and not more information?
Yeah, and
Um,
you'll know too, because like I used to
yeah.
when characters welcome like Justin and Hartney, like they started that. And we would always like have before it was like an official UCB team, it would just be like meeting up with a bunch of us just trying to like do characters and then note each other and stuff. And you could tell like you come in with a first draft and they'd laugh a little bit at like something about it, but then it just wouldn't connect.
Right.
And you're like, so what's missing here? And they're like, I'm confused about this.
Right. And what's the part that they are laughing at? Like, what's the kernel there that's so
Exactly.
interesting?
And usually they'll be like, I was confused at this part. And most of
Mhm.
my first drafts are absolute garbage. And I will try to send it to somebody that I respect, and they'll just take a red pen and be like, this line right here.
Yeah. And sometimes it is truly just a line, right? Like, or a stage direction. It's
And you
like, this
build
is the
out from there.
part of this. So, like, build out from that. Here's a question for you before we start talking more about impressions.
Mhm.
How do you decide, like, what kind of whether something should be like a character monologue or whether it should be in a scene? Is that just purely a question of like whether you're writing for characters welcome or something else? Or are there times where you've like tested it out multiple ways?
I think there are certain characters that I feel like just work best. That's why you kind of see mostly characters in Weekend Update than you do like in a sketch.
Yeah.
Is because something about it just works a little bit better than others. I teach a class called Double Threat, where it's for writer actors.
Mm,
And they're starring in their sketches and they're writing sketches. And sometimes I've had to be like, this isn't working with like a full premise and a voice of reason and stuff. And it's just more about the pure character that seems to work for me. And
mhm,
sometimes it's just being able to feel it out where it's like, this feels better as a character monologue than, say, a traditional sketch.
mhm.
Or even sometimes we'll have characters that it's like, just can't sustain it, but it's funny. There's a
Right.
raw, funny element about it. And that's where it's like, I think this works better as a TikTok
Right,
or
right. That's
Instagram character because, like, the audience doesn't need more.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah, the question of like what is the format entirely that needs to be like, not even
Yeah.
just monologue versus a sketch, like versus a scene. Like,
Mhm.
does it even I the harshest note I ever got was somebody telling me that my sketch was more of a popsicle stick joke. It's like
Right.
a rough thing to hear.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
good sketch, so that's true. But yeah, no, that does happen. But I think there's something interesting about like, does your character benefit from having other people around to sort of like lob, those like serves at them so that they can hit it back? Or is there some other element that's useful? Is the character set in a like, I think again with Cubby Bangs, but also like there's often characters, things that are set with like eulogies or TED Talks, or like there's kind
Yeah.
of pep talks, like those kinds of things where there's sort of like a natural fit
Mhm.
for it to be. Yeah. And then I think also there are times where like opening it up into a scene would actually be distracting, because then you just have a bunch of characters kind of sitting. And if the fun is the
Yeah.
character, like I think that Caitlin Bitsagai and Natasha Rothwell's flight attendant sketch is a great
Yeah.
example of that, where it's like it would be sort of distracting to have people
It stops the
as
fun, right?
yeah.
There's also flow, like sketch or comedy in general is musical.
Hmm.
And this will get into the impression stuff that I'm gonna talk about later because it's a
Yeah.
very music based to me.
Hmm.
Um, but there's pace, there's it's what overall what serves the comedy. What best serves the comedy? Because with Rothwell's flight attendant and Caitlin Bitsagai, they co-wrote that. I guess they co-write that, or was it just
I
Caitlin's
think
character
Caitlin
that?
wrote it, but I'm not sure if it was a Natasha pitch or if it was just the performance, but I think Caitlin wrote it. Yeah.
Regardless, the combination of both Caitlin, who's an excellent writer, and then of course Natasha Rothwell. I mean, come on. I mean, just
Right.
like powerhouse, right? Who could just do this. If you had put it in a sketch scenario where she's interacting with people, to me, it slows down what's fun about it, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
that's why the monologue works. And even in the Cubby Bangs character that I do, I have only one beat where it's interactive because I take it outside of this is what I'm talking about. If you have a character lens on, you can go outside of the main thing because, like, yes, he's just only playing parts of the songs you like, but he's like, I want everything brief. So
Hmm.
when he's taking phone calls from the audience, like the listeners, he's cutting that off early too.
Right.
He's got an ad to read and he like cuts that off early. He ends up unaliving himself at the end because he felt like, all right, this is the best it's gonna get, you know, I'm done,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
Right.
So
That
like
play
that's even part of it, you know?
Right. Let's actually talk now about, because you we kind of naturally segued into sort of the musicality and
Mhm.
impressions. So let's just go ahead and jump into impressions, and then after impressions, I'm going to get to the questions that people had for you, because
Great.
there were a lot of questions that came in.
Yeah, I could talk
But
about
yeah.
this forever, so
Oh,
yeah.
okay, perfect. I mean, I'll like tie in questions as we go.
Great.
Do you have a hard out at okay,
No,
great, perfect. Maybe we'll talk
yeah.
forever. Great.
I'm
Awesome.
technically on vacation this week, so
Oh, great. Well,
I'm
thank you for
chill.
sharing your vacation
Yeah, of
with
course.
all of us. All right,
Yeah.
great. But yeah, let's talk about character impression. So first, like,
Uh-huh.
I'd love to hear sort of your kind of overview. I think you surely have an overview sort of thought about like
Yeah.
impressions and what they are, what they should be, can be, all of that.
Yeah. I think I stumbled into it,
Hmm.
and it all came from character voices and stuff of just, like, playing around, and to be honest with you, it was being at UCB, and there's a bar called McManus that we would all go to after shows, and I'm in my early 20s, you know, not a care in the world, not a dollar in my pocket, and just like that's when you're kind of letting loose with your friends and you're just kidding around and like you're doing voices and you're annoying with each other because you're improvisers and sketch comedians. You're just being the worst, adding with alcohol and whatever else. And I remember just toying around with voices and stuff and somebody being like, oh, that kind of sounds like Vince Vaughn.
Vince Vaughn was your gateway impression.
Yeah, and I think it was Vince Vaughn, and I think that was the first one where I mean, growing up being a fan of SNL, I would always imitate the characters. I remember being at the dentist when I was like 8 years old and my mom being like, "Hey, do your George Bush like that." I was just
Mm,
imitating Dana Carvey or like do the Ross Perot, and it's just
right.
me imitating Dana Carvey's impressions and, all these other impressions. And it started that way, but I never thought about it until later. And I didn't even think I could do it until somebody's like, oh, that kind of sounds like, or you sound like. I remember being at a bar and a bartender's like, oh, you kind of look like Jimmy Kimmel and kind of
Interesting.
sound like him too. And I
Mm.
couldn't figure that out until getting into when I figured out Vince Vaughn and Mamrie Hart. Actually, I have to give her credit. If you're familiar with Mamrie Hart,
Yeah.
yeah, she gave me the line, oh, he always sounds like he's got a frog stuck in his throat.
Okay. Wait. Yeah. Can you give us a little demo right now of that?
Yeah,
I
so then, like, for me, I was like, I already kind of had a little bit of that. I started kind of, like, going from right here, and then I noticed that he would kind of go back, do
mm,
this. So I already had the physicality, and then my voice is starting to but then when she said "frog in the throat," then I kind
mhm.
of started imagining, that's insane, that's what it so
Mm.
and then he, like, uses his hands a lot, and you're
Mm.
using like not really Vince Vaughn the person, you're using the personalities from the movies
Right.
because he
Right.
loves to go on, like he loves to pontificate and just go on riffs.
Yes.
So then it started with that, and then I was like, oh, well, he won't shut up. Like it kind of for me, what was funny about him is when he does like riff in movies and stuff like that.
Right.
And it is charming to a certain degree, but I imagine like you being exhausted by it, being like, just give me an answer. So then I
Right.
was like, ooh, what if I had my angle for the impression was like him having to be brief
Right.
in
Right.
situations where he had to be brief. So it was like him making a tweet,
Yes, I
you know?
love that's such a great example of what you described, like, kind of the hook of an impression. It's, like, not just the physicality, but, like, what is sort of the angle? What is you as the performer, like, your kind of, point of view kind of going into this person,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
But then also having fun with the rants,
Yeah.
because even then he would, like, have a little bit of ADD with it like I do with that stuff of just being like he'll just be, like, talking about, "That's a funny thing about Christmas. You know what? I did Fred Claus. That's a thing about" then he just kinda goes on these little tangents and then ends back up to his main point. So part of it was, like, not being brief and where does the tangent go? I think that, like, James Austin Johnson figured out a good trump. I know we're tired of it. I know, I get it, like, we're tired of it, but he found a fresh angle on it with the thing of where he's going on. It's that same thing of being like, where does Trump start and where does he end up?
Right.
And like that fun of going from that start point to that like meandering end point.
Yeah. Well, there's something really interesting that I think this kind of touches on where you said you described when you were talking earlier about like going to the dentist and your mom saying like do your you described like doing your imitating Dana Carvey's impression, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's something really interesting about the idea of like when you about imitating an impression
Mhm.
versus doing your own impression,
Yeah.
right? And I think that what you're describing in terms of, I think that where a lot of the Trump stuff gets really tired is that
It's
people are
broad.
often imitating an impression that they've already seen versus coming up with their own new take. And I think even Trump is a more extreme version of that, where I think
But
you could
that's
still be
that's
tired
what
of it
makes it
entirely.
fresh, right? Because
That's what
John,
makes it
like,
fresh.
he found and, like, Atamanik too did, like, some great things with it, He found, like again, there were so many impressions, but they all did the whole, like, hand and, like basically, they're just
Yeah.
quoting Trump, right?
Yeah.
And they're not finding the fun angle, if there can be a fun angle, you know what I mean? Like,
Right,
but
right,
he
right. No, no, I
found
hear
that
you.
one thing. Also, he found a different vocal quality to expose with Trump too,
Hmm.
where he was, I think, one of the first people to start doing the gravelly and the whisper and the back
Hmm.
loud type of thing.
Yes.
And like
Hmm.
it's those little details that help separate you because I have a lot of people come to me who are preparing for SNL auditions
Hmm.
or mod auditions or they want to just try impressions and they come to me with the impression and I'm like, you're just doing what everybody else does. What's your
Yes.
take on it? And I
Yes.
think that's important. What is funny to you? What is your angle on it? And that's why they used to say, like, even like Bob Odenkirk talking about, like, it's okay if a premise has been done. It's the way that you do the premise. That I remember Curtis Gwynn was my Sketch 101 teacher, and he told us a story about when he was writing on Human Giant. and that they wrote this sketch and they're like, oh, this is kind of too similar to a Mr. Show sketch. So they called Bob Odenkirk up to get his point of view about like, what do you think we should do? And he was like, why are you calling me? Just do the fucking sketch.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm sure it's different enough. Like, you're not going to copy our sketch exactly.
Right.
What's your take on it?
This is interesting too, because I think this ties into. I was going to save some of these questions for later, but this one just ties in really naturally now. Two people actually asked variations of the same question. One person asked, "Is it better to do a niche impression or one that's really recognizable?" And then somebody else asked, "What's your advice on doing an impression of someone that's not as well known? Do you just treat it as a character, and those who will get it, or do you have to build into the impression ways to catch up the audience?"
I love that.
Yeah, I'd love to chat about that, because I think that part of that, to the question of niche impression or one that's really recognizable, I think this is a sub answer of that, which is that like, even if you're doing a really recognizable character, you need to find your own take, right? It's still at the heart of that. But then there's the part two, which is like, what's your advice on sort of more broadly, if you are doing a niche character, what should you do basically?
My advice on that for students is know your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you delivering it for?
Mm-hmm.
So I find that niche impressions work very well online because it finds the audience it needs to, because niche audiences exist online who you have a wider exposure. Now, if you're doing a show at UCB for a paying audience on a Friday night or Saturday night, or even for like students on a Maud or Betty night or whatever, there's a danger of them not knowing that impression. So I think you have to have, again, context is everything. If you want to do an impression that is very niche for an audience that's pretty broad, or maybe may not get it, they need some kind of context to let them in on that. Like, I think this sketch didn't make it to the stage, but somebody was doing, I can't remember. It was I didn't even know this reality star personality, right? Because I don't watch reality TV. And people who did know it were like, oh, this is a very funny impression. This is like just like this person. Then I said, well, look, I don't know this, so I can't really, and I'm willing to bet if half the class doesn't know it, then the audience won't know it. So we need something to set up, because apparently they had been in the news for something they did. So I was like, what if we ran some of these news clip, like a variation of the news clips of this person in the news, and show those like little brief moments to get the audience set into like, oh, right, this is what's happening with this person. And we're getting a sense of it, to then you can do the impression. And if it's clear enough with the character behavior and point of view, even if I've never seen an episode, but you're clear with what your angle is, I'm going to enjoy the character.
Right. Which gets back also to what you were saying about in terms of clarity, right? What you need to do is make sure the audience doesn't feel like they're missing something, whether that is having those news clips at the top, or alternatively making it feel like a character where, like, even if you don't know the specific reference, you understand sort of the archetype of the person that they are parodying.
And that is something I've noted before, being like, this might be too niche, so why don't you write a character that is based off of this? And you take the behavior and you take like certain elements of it. Like even in Mr. Show, they had a character that was like Blueberry Head or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but it was like, oh, they were doing a Carrot Top type of parody, right? Even like with the Josh Fenderman character from Mr. Show, which loosely based on Corey Feldman. Where they keep showing the clip over and over where he's doing the Michael Jackson dance, and they're using an True Hollywood Story in order to house this character in. And it's based off of Corey Feldman and an True Hollywood Story. And they're using these elements to house it because people are familiar with the True Hollywood Story format. And they're familiar, if it has enough of a unique character game or point of view, then the audience doesn't need to know the details.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
I don't know if I answered the question though.
No, I think you did. I think you did, because I think the question is like, I think in a way, like the question is it better to do niche or better to do one that's recognizable? It's like that's maybe a little bit off of what the heart of the question is, which is how do you make sure your audience is oriented, right? Like making sure that your audience is oriented is the most important thing.
I think also just knowing your audience.
Yeah.
Because like you can do like, there are shows that are like, recently I do a show called Cackle Freaks occasionally that's a horror based improv show, and they're
Right.
doing a horror convention show here soon, and that's where you can get like really granular and niche with your, references and your
Mhm.
plays and all that stuff. But if you're doing it for like a broad audience, just like on a Sunday afternoon, they may not know those things, right?
Yeah, I'm
And
just
that's what I love
remem
about the
yeah.
internet, because then it's like you can do those niche things there and people will find it, be like, oh my God, this is so funny.
It's so funny. I'm thinking right now of my college sketch group where we had a sketch that absolutely killed, and it was like, what if the dorms were people? And it's like, can you imagine like going
Yeah,
into a show like doing
exactly.
that literally anywhere aside from at that specific
Yeah.
college? Like what a disaster that would be. It's just
Yeah,
like
because they're like, we don't have any reference
like
point for that.
no
It's an
frame of
inside
reference for
joke.
this.
Like it's an
Yeah.
inside joke. And that's what you have to kind of think of, that way of being like, is it funny to me and my group of people or my crew, or like even the theater I perform at, like sometimes you'll see that too, where it's like, oh, they're laughing because they know these performers.
Yes.
And if I was some random person on the street coming in, I'd be like, what's so funny about this?
Completely. Yeah.
You know? So it really does. I think it's changed a lot since I started, because when I started, it was like just the beginning of the YouTube stuff. And later on, it became TikTok and whatnot, or Facebook. And because of the niche, uh, because you could do more niche stuff online. I mean, think about Dropout, like, with Brennan and them, like doing the Dungeons and Dragons, like
Yeah.
they found their audience.
Well, this is I think what you're describing also actually answers another question that somebody had, which was, and the question was, I'm curious if you all have found that the rise of reels on social media platforms has changed the way people approach character sketch. And I think that this is at least, I'd love to hear if there's other thoughts you have on this, but this is at least a piece of it, an answer to that, I think, where the ability to go very, very niche and know and have confidence that you will be able to find your audience is probably part of that. Is there anything else that you would add to
Especially with
that?
tags, but also
Yeah.
people's attention span has changed so much. I think one of the
Mm,
complaints that students have about live characters that I've been hearing lately, and a lot of teachers have been hearing lately, is
mm,
about they're too long.
yeah. Mhm.
And comedy evolves.
Right.
It should evolve. And like, even though we teach certain rules, and I stopped saying that they're rules, and I started saying, not to rhyme, but tools.
Mm.
They're tools to help
Not
you.
rules,
Not rules,
tools.
tools. Put that on the header.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, but really it is, because it's like, just like paint, any art form, right? Uh, you learn, like, say if it's, you're learning guitar, you learn the basic scales, or any music, you learn the basic scales, and it's like, what do you do with that afterwards?
Right.
Same with painting, you're painting still life, and then it's like, what do you do with that afterwards?
Yeah.
And I think the more and more that comedy progresses and formats progress of how you even watch or consume, comedy, it changes with that. And you have to, now you could do whatever you want. That's the other thing too. It's like, it's up to you, dealer's choice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it will find an audience, and you just have to say, what do I want from this?
Yeah.
Is it expression, or do I want to reach a wider audience? And if I
Right.
want to reach a bigger pool of fans or audience or whatever, I need to make sure that I'm adjusting to Instagram Reels or
Yeah.
TikTok.
Right.
And but then you get the thing of like, some people really thrive in the TikTok world. When I was going through SNL and JFL auditions, they would always like throw on a YouTube person or a TikToker or whatever, and they would struggle
Yeah.
live.
Yeah. I've seen such things. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And that's because it's not like, I don't know, they may want that. And if they do, they usually seek people like me to be like, how do I extend this, or how do I translate this to the stage? But also, it's like, do you want that?
Yeah.
Like, do you want that? Are you happy doing that? Or are you thriving on TikTok, or being a content creator who does comedy? Are you happy doing that? Have you found your audience? Do you, there has to be joy to this creation
Right.
and what
Right.
you do. That's why I
Right.
stopped doing it for a while, characters and impressions, because I was like, I'm not enjoying this anymore, because I feel like I have to do it.
Right. I think that's a really I think that tying in that question of audience too, like there are reasons that people might enjoy it more online, and there are reasons that people might enjoy it more in
Yeah,
person, right? And
it's
there's no
different.
right or wrong answer. They're just different, and the ways that you create community or don't create community around it, like
Yeah.
it's different. It's not better or worse, just totally different.
It's
Um,
like when you go see a band, I don't know, like for me, I hope it sounds a little bit different than it does on the album,
yeah,
you know? And some people get upset that it doesn't sound like it does on the album,
right,
and it's like it's a different like when I go see live, I want to see the live experience.
right,
I want
yeah,
to see those little imperfections. I want to see these things. I don't want it to sound like that because I can listen to it at home.
right,
So,
yeah,
you know,
right. This is great. Okay, awesome. I have a whole bunch of questions,
yeah,
so I
please.
we'll keep going. So this actually ties back into another question I want to ask you about the reel that we'll link to as well, where you do the characters that you do in the reel. I'm just gonna quickly read over them. There's Jimmy Kimmel. It's a great framing device. Jimmy
Yeah.
Kimmel, the segment of celebrities reading mean tweets about themselves. So you are both Jimmy Kimmel as the intro, and then you do each of the following celebrities: Seth Rogen, Vince Vaughn, John C. Reilly, George Lopez, Robert Downey Jr., Nick Offerman, and John Hamm, right? So a really great combination of some more familiar impressions and some
Yeah.
that are like, I don't think I've really ever seen someone do a John C. Reilly in a sketch show.
Yeah.
So that's a really fun, different
It
one.
started becoming more commonplace. I know that like it was me and Ross Marquand, I think, was other like
Mhm.
very he's a great actor and he does a
Mhm.
lot of voice work too. And I think there were a few people doing it, but like I mean mine's not as good as his is, but like it's just like there was something I was trying to do a Mark Ruffalo and trying to work on a Mark Ruffalo, it came out more like a John C. Reilly.
Well, this is interesting too. Somebody else asked, have you ever been stumped by a character impression you've worked on, but then seen someone else crack it?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. Like, I think, like, even now, there's a guy occasionally, like, not to toot my own horn, but I thought I had a pretty good grasp on impressions, but then you come across people who are just like, you're eating their dust. And like, I'll have people who like are like, oh, you're one of the best impressionists I've seen because you do so much. It's like, I don't really do that much.
Who are some of
And
your favorite impressionists right
well,
now?
because like, I mean, now I'm putting on the spot, but like, I love Dana Carvey.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Um, I love, I think that like what James Austin Johnson is doing
Yeah.
on SNL is incredible. Chloe Feynman, doing a good
Mhm.
job, and Melissa Villaseñor, is really great. Um, there is one guy I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, and I'm like trying to look through my notes here. Uh, I just came across him on Instagram, and I don't know much about this guy, so apologies if he's any problematic or like anything like that. Haven't looked into it, but this guy, his name is Mark Edwards,
Mark Edwards, okay.
and he is so precise with his impressions, but he also finds like fun hooks to them. But he did this thing on one of those podcasts. That's why I say I'm not sure because it looked like a broy podcast. But anyway, he did Stephen Hawking, but the electronic voice. He had the voice and the cadence of that robotic voice
Right.
like down where it sounded
Interesting.
exactly like a voice box.
Whoa, okay,
And it was
interesting.
like, what the hell? There are some
Whoa.
people who are just like out of this world with like
It's like their
how
instrument
precise.
is really yeah.
And it really is like I think something I didn't get to is like when you find a voice, you find a scale. There's this
Yeah.
great documentary called I Know That Voice
Mm.
where it talks to voiceover artists about, their process and everything. And something that they had said that like kind of unlocked it for me is like if you find that root note, then
Mm.
everything else is within that scale
That's
musically.
this is really interesting, and this actually aligns with a question somebody had, which said
Yeah.
somebody who is, I think, been a student of yours said, "Frankie said that a great way to find someone to impersonate is to find someone who has the same vocal tone as you and play with
Mhm.
that." For example, he does Jimmy Kimmel, and they have the same vocal quality. So I'd love to hear you speak more on this, and then the question continues, what are some other helpful tips and tricks while finding celebrities or famous people to impersonate?
Yeah, because for me, it will also if you unlock one impression, it could like you can kind of make variations to get other ones. So for me, it was Vince Vaughn. And because Vince Vaughn has a certain quality to it, then it unlocked. I toyed with it, and then I had all of a sudden I have Dan Aykroyd, and then it's like
Mhm.
I'm pinching a little bit and finding that, do you believe in the strange and unexplained? Like you start to find, and that's kind of some, and the same with Robert Downey Jr., where it's a little bit of uh with Vince Vaughn, but he has a little bit of a rounded way of talking. It's a little
Mm,
bit, there's a little bit of that there, and he just kind of has no,
right.
I don't need to do, it's a little bit of Lorne Michaels too. So
Mhm.
it's like you're starting to like find the variations on it, and then it's like, oh, if I can do this, then that unlocks these other impressions that I
It's
just
so
have to kind of like
interesting.
readjust. And then like, even if it's like for like Nick Offerman, it was getting into, oh, Jim Meskimen is another great
Mm,
impressionist that I even helped me out a little bit. I would DM with me, with him, like kind of asking for advice. And he has this whole series. I don't know if he still has it up on YouTube, but about like literally having the character lens on, like you're that celebrity looking in the mirror and
mm.
finding like little physicality things. And for Nick Offerman, it was like really just like the furrowed brow, and just like,
Yeah.
like just by doing that, it helps me kind of lock in and just, I can,
Well,
yeah.
the thing that's so interesting to me about what you just did was that like you start looking a little bit like all of these people as you do it, and I think that's because of what you're describing. Like it is the so much of it is like facial muscles and voice and throat and all that and
If
forehead.
you
It's like
find those, yeah.
it's kind of uncanny, like, when you see a character reel, it's like, "Oh, this person like, these 2 people don't look alike, and yet somehow this person looks like both of them." It can be very cool and very uncanny to see.
It's fun because like even with like Jimmy Kimmel, what helped me out was like he just always looks high, and he has like his eyes are always kind of like closed. So then I was
Mhm.
kind of using the Vince Vaughn thing too, of like the frog in the throat, but then close in the eyes, and then he just kind of leans back like this, and he has a
Yes.
certain cadence, like
Yeah.
if you find like, um yeah, I mean, like there are just certain people who just like they will really, uh hold on, give me 1 second, because I know another person that I want to
Yeah,
mess up her
yeah.
last name because I never say her last name.
That's
I
totally
just know
fine. No,
her,
this is so
yes.
great.
Yeah, but like she is incredible with the facial expressions. Hold on. Sorry.
No, no, don't be
This is
sorry. This
great.
is
This is great to do during a live feed of like
No, it's
looking
totally
up,
fine. I'm loving this. It's so much fun to talk about this stuff. I'm as a fellow sketch nerd, and I'm sure anyone listening and tuning in is also a sketch nerd. I think this is exactly what people are here for. So
because also like I did make some noise with her, along with Lisa, Mary Elizabeth Kelly.
Mary Elizabeth Kelly. Okay, awesome.
If you
Yeah,
look up, she will do like these just runs of, because I only know her as Mary. I rarely ever said her last name, but we did dropouts, make some noise together, like with Lisa Gilroy too, where we just did impressions. That was the whole
awesome.
episode. So you can find that on Dropout if you want to watch it. But
Great.
Mary, if you look at her Instagram or TikTok, it is the transformation she does by just like, she'll do a whole thing about mouth impressions.
Mm.
She'll do a whole thing on eye impressions. Like she has the physical, and she will change. Like she
It's also
becomes that celebrity, and it's
It's really
really insane.
interesting, and I do
Yeah.
think it's interesting with all of these things how, like, whenever you've started with, like you start with the brow, I feel like like, I've seen your body, like, physically lean forward or lean
Mhm.
back at these things, and I think it's such a great kind of taking us back to in your character classes, right?
Yeah.
Like, how you do that exercise walking around the room, and that really what you're in a way, I think I think what I'm really coming to appreciate in this conversation is that an impression really is still like a character sketch, and you're just finding your version of the character of that existing person,
Well,
right?
what's funny is when the person that you do sees your impression, because like people were showing Nick Offerman the impression that I do,
Mm.
and his answer to that, and he was very gracious, but he was also like saying, that's a great Ron Swanson.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I was
Interesting.
like, you're right, because I'm doing a broad, for me to lock into you, I kind of had to do the broader elements of it. And I'm using your Ron Swanson as kind of a starting point because it's broader.
Right.
And then I can get a little bit more specific, even though I've watched like interviews and stuff like that. And I met him in person too. And that was like another thing to be like, let me study this a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then like Seth Rogen, sometimes you have to be, I feel a little bad about my Seth Rogen impression because he saw it, but he didn't like it.
Oh,
Because
why
I think
not?
my angle was a little not mean. And I was hoping that he would like enjoy being a comedy fan, knowing like, you know, sometimes we take the piss out of celebrities or whatever. Because my whole angle was more of like, what if we put Seth Rogen in a Game of Thrones scenario? And he's Seth Rogen. Like he's not going to do a British accent and like really
Right.
lose himself in the character of that world. So it's him, you know, just being like, I've come here to get revenge for King Joffrey. You know, like
Right.
it's
That's interesting.
yeah,
Right. That it's like what you're it's not that you're saying he couldn't do it. It's just that you're saying that like Seth Rogen is such a kind of defined, clear person in our minds, but that might be
yeah.
something that they would that he would object to. That's really interesting.
But even with the John C. Reilly impressions, like I don't have a very distinct point of view or character game for it. It's just other than like him just being kind of lovable a little bit, you know, like
Yeah.
that kind of dopey voice. But yeah.
One thing I actually also did want to call attention to that I really appreciated in your reel is that it's such a and this is something that I want to mention just from having watched mod auditions sometimes for the UCB.
Mhm.
I love how varied the energies are of the character. I think that
Yeah.
sometimes something people because I was going to ask like how you think about putting together a reel because I think
Yeah.
that sometimes people think about like, okay, I have to show like how much I can do. I can go big this way, I'm big this way, I'm big this way. And I think that there's sometimes it starts to feel one note. So like how do you think
Absolutely.
about cultivating a reel and like coming up with enough variety or like how do you showcase range basically?
Even in a character sketch, I'm often noting like it's becoming white noise because you're always at this level.
Yes.
And just as us as people, we have our quiet moments, we have our louder moments, and they all have to exist within that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're doing if you're doing a character set, and like we ran this like crazy because I had screen tested for SNL in 2014, 2015,
Mm-hmm.
the year they hired Pete Davidson. So I was running my character sets like anywhere and everywhere I could. And what I've learned is the way that I approach character sets for live character sets, I'm a big believer in shit sandwich. That's what the term we use in sketch of being like for either putting together shows or if you have a set of being like, I'm going to put my strongest at the beginning and my strongest at like my two strongest beginning and end for a
Mm-hmm.
live set where people can't just leave or turn it off, right?
Right.
So then that way I can find the variations. And when I do like a big character, I got to make sure that my second character doesn't feel too similar to this one, right?
Right.
That my third character can feel a little similar to my first character, but there's enough separation that the audience can reset.
Right.
And then even then, like I'm a big fan of like the 10-1, like the weirder stuff goes second to last
Right.
or last because like the audience is already invested in it. And that for me in a character set, if you put your weirder one second to last, if it doesn't work, you have your hit after that to win them back.
Right.
To me,
Right.
it's like a playlist. Same
Yeah,
with like
I was
putting a
gonna
sketch
say
show together.
it makes sense that we're circling back to a musical
It
analogy here,
is.
and I think that especially for you as a character performer, but also you as a person who loves music very
Yeah.
deeply, it makes sense that this is sort of a way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Because you want to make sure an audience can go on a journey. And if you're just like blasting them the whole time, they're going to get exhausted or it's becoming white noise where they're just like, they tune out.
Yeah.
But if you give them variety, it makes it a lot easier to follow. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, this is great. This actually so there's one more question about, kind of character stuff, and then there's a few, like, general sketch
Yeah,
questions if you have time that I'd love to
absolutely. I
get
do.
into.
Yeah.
Awesome. So first, this is a question in terms of character stuff.
Hmm.
So something that I think is really interesting, I think You Should Leave is a show that I love, so
Yeah.
many people I know love. It's wonderful.
It's one of my
It's
favorites of all time.
it's
Yeah.
fantastic. It's just so great. I think something that's really interesting is as a teaching tool, it can sometimes be complicated, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's in part because of what you're describing now. I think that sometimes people watch it and sort of take away the wrong lesson from it because
absolutely.
so many of the characters are very loud, right?
Yeah.
Like they're big and loud.
They're like,
And
"Oh,
that's
screaming is funny."
right.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious to hear. I have some thoughts on this, but I'm really curious to kind of chat through with you like how would you describe, 'cause and then people sometimes say like, "Oh, well, it's not game, it's this other wacky thing," and it's like, "No, but it is
It
still
is
game,"
game.
right?
Yeah.
How I'd love to chat through with this with you because
Yeah.
I think that to me, a lot of the Tim Robinson sketches, they are very clearly game, but where they spend a lot more time on the exploring if this is true about this character than what else is
Exactly.
true versus hitting the behavioral beats of a narrow behavior.
Mhm.
How do you think about like when you show students I think you should leave, like what are the lessons they should take away and what are the ones that they might avoid taking away from it?
I think you should leave, like, again, like with Tim and Eric, or I think you should leave. Again, comedy has to evolve, and there's a reason why those things are popular is because it breaks sketch convention. And I think that look, we teach at UCB, we teach like the basic tools of it, right? But what you do with it, I mean, even with my sketch group when I was in New York, Onassis, we would get notes like crazy because we would do game-based sketches, but sometimes we'd just be like, what if we kept repeating this one part? Like, what if we just kind of blew out the small rather than the big? What if we went micro rather than, the macro? And like
Right.
would really test an audience's patience and like find those things and break it. But for like, I think you should leave as a good teaching tool for traditional sketch of just being like context.
Mhm.
Every sketch that no matter how weird it gets or no matter how where it goes, it still sets up the scenario very clearly
Yeah.
to then introduce the craziness because we've settled into that and then we can follow that logic. But also, this is why it's so important to know your voice.
Mhm.
I think you should leave like, yes, there are other characters or actors he brings in to play the main parts of sketches, but it's because they can zero in on the intricacies of what he finds funny, what his
Yeah.
voice is. Him and Zach, their voice together. Other people can't do that, so you need to find, like, what your thing is. Key and Peele, like, certain Key and Peele sketches work because it's Key and Peele.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
them.
Right.
Nobody can do Matt Foley but Chris Farley. I
Yeah.
mean, Melissa McCarthy's great, like, when she did it during the 50th or whatever, like, that was still funny and awesome, but it's not Chris Farley.
Right. It's
So, you need to
yeah.
know your strengths and your voice, and I think that's what helps that work where you can break sketch convention because we are clued into the behavior and the taste and the style
Right.
of the show, then we can follow along and enjoy it.
The other thing that occurs to me about I think you should leave is what you were saying before about elasticity in the
Mhm.
characters. I think that that is a show where the characters, all of the characters in a sketch are unusually like a little more elastic than you
Oh,
often
yeah.
have, right? Like their
Yeah.
voice of reason characters often have like a little bit more going on, but they're always still it's always still very clear what's going on in the scene. So I think again
Because
that
it's
pairing of clarity and elasticity.
also I found, like, but I mean, it's like one of my comfort watches sometimes where I'm just like, I don't know what to put on, and they're only 15-minute episodes, and they're very
Right.
quick, and it's like but in those sketches, you'll have, like, more than one unusual character, and typically, we're like, it only has to be one, right?
Right.
But even those unusual characters are serving the comedy of the scene and the main
Yes.
idea, and it never takes away from the main craziness, right?
Yeah.
And it's still in service of the scene, it's still in service of the comedy, and even if they have these, like, other weird characters, they don't take away, they don't put us on a detour.
Yeah.
They exist in something that I think is really cool that that show does is you can have weird characters that aren't the main characters and weird and
Yeah.
funny jokes, but it still works because there's still an umbrella that they play under.
Yeah. There's a really clear point of view that they have too. Like it's that
Yeah,
that's never confusing. I think that's
yeah.
great. Yeah.
Because like, even, like, with the Will Forte sketch with he has the ponytail,
Mhm.
and he gets stuck under the car, because they parked halfway through the driveway and the sidewalk. And at one point, there's another guy with a ponytail, and he's like, "Hey, you can't park there because of this." And he's like, "Thank you, I've got it." And he's got this weird contentious like relationship with him, but it doesn't deviate the sketch, and it's still focused on the main thing. And it's just another funny layer to it. And also, you have to keep in mind that a lot of these comedians like Tim Robinson or Tim and Eric or whatever, they've spent years on stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've spent years doing this and failing and finding what works and finding their voice. And they know what works for them and what works. They've tested it out. So then they can like find ways where I'm sure they've written sketches where there's like a bunch of weird characters and then they're like, "Ooh, that was a mess."
Right.
It was
Right.
fun, but it was a mess. But then they found that balance.
Yeah.
And again, that's what it is. Like if you want to perform, if you want to do comedy, especially live comedy, you have to fail.
Yeah.
You have to find places to like eat shit on stage
Yeah.
and just like completely fall flat and start to fine tune and adjust as you go
Yeah.
along and find what
Which
works.
is part of why I think a through line in the book that I'm working on now is the idea that it is sketch as a medium that really supports you learning about your own creative process because you
Yeah.
are so deeply engaged in your process and fine tuning and you're finishing things all the time, like, and you're seeing how they go, like
Mhm.
because you're finishing things and then rewriting them and then whatever. So anyway, yeah, this is great. Okay, a few more questions.
Yes, please.
So somebody asked, any advice for sketch writers wanting to convey what a character is like in a packet or situation where they won't be there in person to pitch the character, like in terms of like sharing, like the, maybe like some of the voice stuff you just, the musicality when you aren't there to sing the music for them.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
I've had characters like that where it's I've done them in a show and it works because it's me performing it.
Mhm.
And it's very hard to convey that in a packet, like for
Yeah.
SNL or whatever or mod. Um, those maybe this is bad advice, but like I typically tell students like if it doesn't translate, just have somebody else read it. And if it doesn't translate because it requires the performance behind it, I wouldn't put that in a packet.
Yeah.
I'd find another sketch that just depends on like the point of view and behavior is clear and the situation that you've written out can be read by anybody and it's still like hit.
Yeah.
But when it's so performance based and you can't be there to do that, then it's like, well, that's where it's good for a reel or to put online or to put in your own sketch show or whatever, where it can translate that way.
Right.
Because they're reading through so many packets. You know what it's like to read through hundreds of packets.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's
It's
a lot, and you
tiring.
start your eyes start to cross, and it's like if it's not clear or if it depends on the performance, then it's not good for a packet.
Yeah.
When you get the job and you can be on SNL and you can perform it, great.
Yeah. I think that's really great because really it is when you talk about knowing your audience, there's also the question of like, does your audience know you? And like,
Exactly.
will they give you the benefit of the doubt? Will they, and when you're reading packets as somebody's reviewing submissions, like you don't necessarily, even if you're giving the benefit of the doubt, you really don't know where that person or the writer is coming from. So if something is not jumping off the page as solid, you aren't necessarily inclined to assume like, I bet if they were here, it would make so much sense, right? Like you're
You don't want
having
to
to
be in
make a
that
decision on
position,
something.
yeah, to be
Yeah.
like, "Oh,
Yeah.
if only you could see and hear," and it's
Yeah.
like, "Well, I can't right
I
now, so I don't
can't.
know how
Yeah.
to." Like Gary Richardson is like one of my favorite, performers and stuff, and he is a writer, or he was a writer for us, and I don't know if he's still there or not. But one of the bits he would do is so funny of where he's talking at a courtroom about like my client said that they went to get some za, and it's like him going pizza, pizza, lasagna, lasagna, pizza, pizza, lasagna. And of course, it's not funny when I do it, but when he does it, it's fucking hilarious. But then he wrote it. I think it was, oh God, what's his name? God damn it. He was in Freaks and Geeks. He was kind of canceled a little bit. Why?
Jason's
Not Jason
no, no.
Segel.
Sorry.
Why am I blanking? Somebody in the comments, please help me
Wait,
out.
Ashton,
No.
no.
Why am Franco, James Franco.
James Franco. Okay, there we
Yeah,
go.
right? James Franco, not his brother. Yeah, but anyway, he hosted the show and he did that sketch. And it's like, it's funny, but it's not, he didn't execute it as well as
Right.
Gary did, right? You know,
Right.
it's such a funny sketch and such a great premise and character. And it just, yeah, James Franco, thank you, Kim. Um, and it just like, yeah, it just like, it was kind of disappointing to be like, oh, I'd rather Gary be a part of the cast and do that,
Right,
you
right. Yeah,
know?
totally. No, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's a very helpful way to think about it, where it's like, write those sketches, but a packet is just not the place for it. I think that's a good thing
Yeah,
to
you just
think
have to make sure it's like, and this is why it helps. I get it. Sometimes I get guarded about my work and I get nervous about sending it to other people to read over, but it is important
Yeah,
because you need to know if it's translating outside of your own
totally.
bubble, you
Yeah.
know.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, a couple more questions before I
Yes.
release you.
I yeah, I hope I'm not rambling or
No,
anything. Yeah,
this is great. I'm loving this. I could absolutely talk
great.
all night about this stuff. This is great. So first, somebody asked if we could talk a little bit about the kind of the terms pitch versus game versus premise, like
Mhm.
what sort of they are. I think game versus premise. I'll just kind of jump in here a little bit because I think that I think sometimes the distinction between game and premise is overblown. I think sometimes it's a bit of a semantic
Yeah,
distinction that we spend a little too much time trying to carve out. What I will say is that you can often think about premise as sort of the broader description of your sketch,
yeah,
and then the game as the specific way that it is playing out in terms of what the points of view are of the characters who are in it. So, an analogy that that has resonated with me is if the premise is the woods, the game is your path through the woods, right?
mhm,
The path that you're taking. So, you know,
exactly.
the premise of the audition sketch, there's a monologue, and it's hard to tell if the actor is talking to them, or if or if it's the monologue itself, right, from the Mr. Show sketch. You could imagine different games around that premise where, you know, the one that we all know and love is that it's the unusual character is the person auditioning. You can't tell. You could also imagine a version where the casting directors are like, what do you mean to be or not to be or something? I don't think that would be a very good sketch, but it would be a
Yeah.
different version of that
That
premise.
sketch in general too, I use that as an example of like, to me, the way I describe it to me, and I don't know if people will agree with this, other comedy writers or sketch performers. To me, premise is literally like the who, what, where.
Mm-hmm.
What is the situation?
That's
What are we
interesting. Mm-hmm.
setting up from the
Yeah.
moment of like interior, exterior, setting up? I use your sketch of the Fringe sketch
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where it's a housewarming get together, two couples, they're like, here's a housewarming gift. To me, that's the premise, right? Of like that happening. And then they open it up, and then the one of the husbands is like, oh no, it's ripped.
Right. Mm-hmm.
This blanket that they got is ripped. And they're like, no, honey, it's fringe. And he doesn't understand it, right? To me, the premise is that situation of having the housewarming and giving the gift,
Right.
right?
It's I think this is very validating for I hope for people, because I do think that sometimes when you hear the terms you want to like really get what the terms are. And I
Yeah.
think premise in particular is one that like can sort of mean different things for different people.
Yeah.
And I think basically the difference between premise and game is really like game is like the decisions that you have made to execute the thing that's fun for you, right? Like that's sort of like the main thing.
Yeah, I think so. It's just like, what is your, I mean, like the who, what, where, there's an exercise we do in Improv 201, I think, or maybe it's 101, where it's like the second date,
Mhm.
right? Where you have two improvisers, and that's all you start with. It's like, it's a second date at Chili's.
Mhm.
That's all we have. And the way that the unique improvisers, the two improvisers start to have a conversation in yes and, they start to find what's their unusual thing. And then after that, they're done. Great. Here's what was funny about that scene. This happened. You ended up being a vampire in this scene, and you know, whatever. And then the two new improvisers go up and they do a completely different scene, but the setup is still the same.
Right.
So to me,
Right.
it really is like, what's that who, what, where? What's the situation you're setting up as a premise? And then the unusual angle and the like unique thing about it is where the game is. And then we just say, okay, well, given this information, what else is true? and how can we use this situation or these characters to play out that truth?
Right. That's great. And I think that to the third term that was in rotation here was also the idea of a pitch, of
Pitch.
like, what is
Yeah.
a pitch? And I think that what I would say, and Frank, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that basically when you are pitching a sketch, often that the context of that is that you are in, the first meeting of your sketch team after one show ends and you're
Yeah.
preparing for the next show, deciding, what the show,
Yeah.
what sketches you're going to try to write up. I would say that a pitch is really a place where you can either pitch a game for a sketch, or sometimes you do just wind up pitching a premise where you're like, it's something where like there's an audition, but the monologue is confusing. And then
Yeah.
maybe your fellow writers and actors are helping you
pitch
pinpoint
on
what
it,
those
yeah.
decisions are, right? Like that where, so how do you think pitch sort of comes into play? Does that sort of sound about right to you too?
It's also depending on where you're pitching.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which is funny. When I was doing my SNL auditions, I would ask them about pitch, how that works. And then they would be like, oh yeah, no, you don't want to pitch a good idea at pitch meeting because then the joke is spent and it's not going to be fresh at table read. So I was like, well, then why do you do that? Like, it was just kind of all like a pageantry. I don't know. It's kind of like just to get the host comfortable and knowing you, I guess. I don't know. It blew my mind when they told me that. And I was like, well, what's the point of pitch? Right.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah.
So with mod, like something like a house team, it's a little bit looser, right?
Yeah.
But we try to be a little bit more concise about. I started doing this thing with my students for improv classes after they do a scene of being like, what would you label this if you uploaded it to YouTube? So that people would click on it, because it forces them to be like succinct about what the fun thing is, right? And when in my own classes, when I tell students to pitch, I'm like, one sentence. That's all you get. You can't be like, well, there was this guy and then this thing and that thing. It's more of like, yeah, guy who blank, even just like keeping it that simple.
Yeah.
And then you can elaborate more on it. But I find that like certain places want that specificity.
Yeah.
Because they're just moving on.
Right.
They're not going to pitch on it. They're just listening for ideas that immediately grab you.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of like, if you didn't have anything, you didn't have anything, we're moving on.
Right.
But for something like mod,
yeah.
or like I recently did Ask Sketch, here in LA, and that pitch process is a lot looser.
Right.
Where you can be like, this is a half idea. I really don't have anything, but here's my idea.
Right.
A guy is wobbly with trays.
Right.
Like there's really nothing there. And then you
Right.
start to ask. Also, what helps me, or when students have broader pitches like that, I'm like, but what's funny to you about that?
Right.
What made you laugh to begin with? And when you start getting to the core base, this is what made me laugh, you start to find the specificity in that and be like, let's build out from there.
Right.
Because you're trying to force this other thing, but that's not what you found funny to begin with.
No. Yeah.
We're building out from what made you laugh.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
It's a great reminder to kind of look at the heart of it. Awesome. And then one last question before I ask if you have anything you'd like to plug. I'm going to read this question, so a slightly longer one. So this is from somebody who wrote, I think we've all written a first draft that has the kernel of a good idea, but ultimately needs a different approach and an 80% rewrite. But in this situation, some writers will only ever make minor changes. Why is that? Changing 10% at a time will simply never make that sketch stage ready. I'm a writer and not a director, so maybe I shouldn't concern myself with this, but I know how disappointing it is to have a fourth draft sketch get cut. Is there something the writer's room can say or do to encourage them to make big changes, or if they prefer, move on to a different sketch? For example, is it helpful to give explicit feedback about how big the changes are that are required? I think this is a great question, because it's like, the feeling of like when you're on a sketch team and you're sort of, it feels like you're sometimes watching, not exactly a train wreck, but you're watching like a slow motion fizzle where it's just it's still not getting better. It's not getting better.
Yeah, I think people, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, what are your thoughts and tips for that situation?
I get excited by these questions and I get very like,
absolutely.
I think it's super hard because like, I know what it's like to do 8 rewrites and it just falls apart.
Yeah.
I think people think like, oh, I got notes and I got rewrites. That's it. And that's not it. Like sometimes it could get so far away from the intention. So like me as a director, when I direct, I'm very open to be like, I could be wrong about this, but can we at least try it?
Yeah.
And you have to make an effort as a writer to really understand what those notes are, what is being asked of you, and to actually give a true attempt to adjust to those notes.
As a collaborator, though, like as like let's say writer A is getting those notes,
Yeah.
writer B is sitting there at the table watching them bring back this draft.
Hmm.
Is there anything writer B can do in that context? Like, I think that my
You
initial thought is like drawing attention to the thing that you like that is missing currently from the draft, right? Being like, this line is pointing to something really cool, like what you were describing with when you show your first draft of an impression to somebody, where it's like this stage direction and nothing else, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is the upbeat kind of cheerleader version of that so that they are, instead of, I think sometimes people get a little pressure about like, I'm going to tinker a little here and a little there versus starting entirely new.
Fresh.
And if you can kind of incentivize people that like something really new and great lingers just over here.
It's really hard to do when you're not a director.
Yeah.
If you're just somebody in the room and you see it and you want to give that feedback, it's such a hard thing to do because you're not in charge in
Yeah.
that situation, but you want it to be the best it can be. So, flies with honey type of approach where you're on the money with that. I think of saying like, these lines, these parts made me laugh. I wish there were more of that,
Yeah.
or we can expand on that.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard because there's egos in the room,
Yeah.
especially with newer sketch groups, or you have groups with just big personalities. We've been there, we know.
Yeah. Mhm.
And you can't control egos. So the best you can do is point to the stuff that works and
I think
why it
there's
works.
I think there's also an interesting question where like what is the reason that that's happening is sometimes interesting too. Is it like a question of like the person isn't able to imagine what the rewrite should look like? And in that case, it's a question of like, okay, so there maybe this little tweaking editing thing that's happening is just the path of least resistance. In that case, then sometimes spelling out for them more like, okay, here are a few beats that I see that would be really great
I
in
think
this
it does
sketch.
have to
Like
be that.
I think sometimes it really is that, like, just
Yeah.
helping them see more clearly so that they can see something that isn't just like what's on the page in front of them, but then sometimes it is people just saying like, no, my sketch is my sketch. And in that case, like, there's nothing you can do and they are just going to eventually either learn from having their sketch be cut at the
Yeah.
last rehearsal or they won't and they'll do a different type of writing that
It
doesn't
really
require
is
collaboration.
personal. I think it really is. Some people just don't want to make the changes because they're so set on their sketch, and other people don't have the capability to actually deliver on that because they don't know how to.
Yeah.
So it is helpful just to like pitch. As a director, you want to like I fall in sometimes of being a little too broad and help like being like, I want you to, here's what we need more of. Maybe it's a little bit too much of a broad approach, but like I like to give the writer the benefit of the doubt of knowing what I'm talking about, of where it
Yeah.
needs to go. But other times, if it's like in the rewrite and it's just not hitting, I'm being like, okay, I will literally take the PDF and annotate it and be
Right.
like, here's the opportunity where we could do something like this.
Right.
And then I'll get more granular with it.
The only other thing I would add to this, because I think that's great, is I would say if you are again a writer on the team of the person who's like not tweaking it and things keep getting cut last rehearsal, what you can do is reach. Any director has definitely experienced writers and actors reaching out privately and done a little bit of like side conversations about various dynamics, elements, whatever on a team. What you can do is reach out to the director and say like, especially if it's a new director, because I think I should preface. Often sketch teams change directors, right?
Yeah.
So what you can do is reach out to the director and say, "Hey, so and so, just as a heads up, so and so's had a lot of sketches cut at like the last rehearsal. I think that might be because they're having a little trouble getting the beats figured out. So just I wanted to let you know that they might benefit from blah blah. Do with that what you will. If you trust your director, if you trust your director, if it's a good director,
That
then
can be
like
tricky. Yeah.
that can be helpful. If it's not a good director, probably don't do that because that can also backfire.
They
But I
get
would say
defensive and then they're like, oh, you're telling me how to do my job. And
yeah, but I think that sometimes giving a director context if there's like a weird situation on a team
yeah,
can be helpful. And if it is becoming a weird situation where somebody is like constantly not rewriting and then getting things cut, that's useful insight for a director to have. And just as long as you are approaching it, like as long as you're approaching it like genuinely, and not like this isn't like a secret thing where you're like, I want to complain about this writer before you've gotten a chance to know them. Like, I think that as long as you're approaching it with like genuine care for this writer,
Mhm.
that's like a good that's like a fine thing to do.
I think people would be less precious if they actually were able to. I mean, that's why I think it's important to listen to interviews with writers that you respect and
Yeah.
like, and creatives that you really like, because they will be very honest about the fact of their process.
Yeah.
Because I've been in rooms with people who will have a kind of like an okay first draft. The second draft just still isn't working, but then they get like a certain note and then they just make it amazing.
Yeah.
Where it's like, there I think I wish people could see more processes of like professionals, and they'll
Yeah.
realize it's closer to what they do than they think.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it's pretty much a lot of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks and just being open to it. Because like me as a director, I'll be honest about being like, you know what, I gave you these notes and it's not working.
Yeah.
And I'll do that in even a professional setting of just being like, I don't agree with the note that they gave me, but I'll
Mhm.
give it to them, and sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, actually, never mind."
Yeah. Mhm.
So it's
It
a process is just all over the place
it's
sometimes.
And I think that I think that the most important thing, I think as a director, but also as a teammate, is making sure people feel safe to sort of explore things, and that like, because I think a lot of times it's like either not having the time, in which case that extra bit
That
of
happens a lot.
suggesting can help,
Yeah,
but sometimes it's fear of feeling stupid. So I think that that's where like saying like, let's try it the way opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like all like where it's 100% unusual character, go, go, go all the time. And then we can
yeah.
dial it back and find the sweet spot, like giving people permission so that they're not expecting that other people think this is what they think is done and good. I think that can be
I think
helpful.
you bring up a good point, and it's very hard to do with so many egos, but, like, I think that you need to foster an environment that is collaborative, that's another thing too I have to teach students, is being like, yes, they pitch this joke for your sketch and you feel weird about using it, but the hope is that you will pitch something on their sketch the next
Yeah.
time. You want to have an environment where like you can open it up to being like, I can recommend something to you and you can recommend something to me, and we can fail together and we can have these
Yeah.
moments, and then also be honest about the fact it's not working.
Yeah.
Let's do
I think
this.
that's one of the things that's the most beautiful about sketch, is that you are constantly trying to create an atmosphere of creative generosity, right? And you're practicing all the time, and people are practicing with you all the time. And Frank, I just love, I feel like this was just such a fun conversation to have and like nerd out about all of this stuff, because I do
Yeah.
just genuinely find it to be one of the most interesting things to talk about. And I've loved hearing all of your thoughts about
Yeah.
characters, sketch, impressions, all of the above. And I will love to have you back again at some
I'd
point in the
love to be
future to
back. I'm
talk
sure
more
I still
about
have a
these
lot
things.
more.
Oh my gosh. Yes, we'll make more times to have you as a guest, because this is just like so much fun.
Great. Yeah.
Before we part ways, are there any parting piece of advice that you have that you would like people to bear in mind? And then any plugs that you have for upcoming shows or upcoming anything that you want to put on people's radar?
Um, as far as advice, whoops, sorry, my computer went off there. As far as advice goes, um, just keep working, keep writing. I'm very much of a like draft type of person, like
Yeah.
blue skying and
Yeah.
just trying to figure it out. It's something I didn't get to talk about when I teach characters sometimes, is just being like the columns. I might have talked
Mhm.
about this in the SNL
Mhm.
thing that I do, where it's like one column is for the character, the pure character, and the other column is for the premise.
Yeah.
So if it's like character at a restaurant, then I just list the things that could happen at a restaurant and the details of it. And then I go down the list and say, here's how my character would do this. Here's how my character would do that. And then I just look at it as a draft and then be like, I like this moment. I like this moment. I like this moment. It feels like it's a heightened thing. And I'll put them in that order and then fine tune where I need to. But writing down, like using your notes app, like anything, just like everything, even if it's just like a noise that you want to record yourself doing,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
literally not thinking about the end product at all.
Yeah.
Literally just giving yourself to the process and just doing anything you want without like thinking about the end product.
Yeah.
Nobody sees it until the end product. I know there are people that you workshop it with, but really, like, you have to be open to just throwing stuff out there. Get it
Yeah.
out of your mind, get it out of your head, and just put it down, and then you can sort it out and
Yeah.
enjoy that process.
Love it. Love
And as
it.
far as plugging things, I don't have anything at the moment. I just did Ask Sketch. I teach sketch and improv and sometimes character at UCB here in LA. And yeah, I don't think I have anything important coming up yet.
But keep an eye out. Frank does lots of shows, and truly do look into his classes, because
Yeah.
Frank, you are just a gem. It is so much fun talking to you about all this stuff, and
It's great
I
talking
am
to you. Thank you
so
for having me.
grateful. Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Next week we will be having another craft conversation. This one will be with two writers for the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. We'll be talking about topical and political sketches. So yeah, follow the Substack, tune in, and spread the word to your fellow sketch nerds. Frank, thank you again so very much, and
Yeah,
I'll
thank
talk to you
you.
soon.
Bye.
All right, bye.